Hello everyone, I'm Samantha Jane Smith.
And I'm Jacob Keynes, and you are listening to the Classical Queer Podcast.
Hello everyone and welcome to the latest episode of the Classical Queer Podcast. We're so pleased to welcome back to the show composer Florence Anna Maunders. Welcome, Florrie.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be back.
Great. Well, it was in November 2021 we last had you on the show. And since then, we've kind of watched in a bit of amazement with all the things you've been doing. I took a quick look at some things that you've put on your website. You won a Royal Philharmonic Society Prize in 2022. You've been working with the London Chamber Orchestra, the Mid-Wales Strings. The list goes on and on. So perhaps the best place to start there is to tell us a little bit about what's been happening in the last year or so.
Oh gosh, what a great introduction. So yes, I have been tremendously busy, which is great. It's what every musician wants to be, I suppose. And as we've kind of made this recovery from the pandemic and the lockdowns and so on, it's been really good to get back into music making. So yeah, and where to start really? I mean, it's such a busy kind of musical landscape that I'm living in at the moment. I suppose you've already mentioned like one of the real highlights of the last few months, which has been winning the Royal Philharmonic Society Composition Award, which is absolutely fab. I mean, it's a super recognition, as well as this opportunity to work, in my case, with the Cayenne Quartet, who are a lovely quartet, London-based string quartet, and it's also in partnership with the Wigmore Hall in London as well. Oh. So I'm just in the process at the moment of working on a new piece with them and for them, which is getting its premiere next month, actually, in April. I think it's the 19th of April off the top of my head.
And that's in the Wigmore. That's going to be at
the Wigmore Hall. Yeah, I get to play in all the nicest places. 16,
fantastic.
I think.
Yeah,
16th.
it's a brilliant place. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's been really nice working with the Wigmore Hall actually, and they've made me feel super welcome, and being able to use the hall itself as a rehearsal venue and work with the quartet there is a real treat. So that's great. Not the first string quartet I've written, obviously, but this one's going to be quite new and exciting. So starting by looking forward here towards what's coming up very soon. Of course, the other thing that's kind of dominating what I'm doing at the moment is my partnerships I've got going on with 3 different brass bands across the country. So I don't know what you or your listeners know about the brass banding world.
Please, I think you should say something because they come from all over the place, and I suspect it's different in the UK to some other places. So,
yeah, okay. So the UK brass banding scene is an amateur musical scene. But they perform at extremely high standards, and it's competitive as well. So if you're familiar with the way that, for example, like the Football League is structured or something like that, so there's like the different divisions, and the top division, the kind of the Champions League or whatever is called the championship brass bands. So these are the kind of the leading bands in the country, and the standard of musicianship in these bands is extraordinary. These are musicians of the very highest standard, and the fact they're all doing it as a hobby is utterly incredible. And there's equivalents in other countries as well. So the UK style brass band is popular kind of across Europe and in the States, and some other isolated outposts of civilization like New Zealand or somewhere. So yeah, it's been
for our New Zealand listeners, she didn't really mean it's an outpost of that.
Yeah, outpost is a good thing to be. It's always good to be an outpost of civilization rather than of some sort of barbarian land like, I don't know, Surrey or somewhere. Apologies to listeners in Surrey. I'm sure it's lovely.
Yeah, actually, I must say that some years ago I went to a brass band sort of colliery based thing. There some of the colliery bands were playing up in the Yorkshire, And they were absolutely fantastic. For a bunch of people who were amateur and this, it was absolutely brilliant. So fully agree with what you say about the standard of musicianship. Really, really high.
Yeah. So I'm really fortunate that I'm working actually with not one, but 3 British Championship bands at the moment. I'm currently composer in residence with Fulham Band down in London. Fab band, lovely, lovely people. I got the chance to work with them through the Making Music's Adopt a Composer scheme, or Adopt a Music Maker scheme. And we loved each other so much. We said we can't just like break this association after a year. So we sorted out this sort of composer in residence scheme to do another 3 years together. And then I'm also working with and playing with Wantage Band in Oxfordshire. Another championship band, super high quality. In fact, I'm going to go and spend some time with them this evening because we're going to play the area championships the weekend. Who knows? Maybe win some shiny trophies. But through Newbury Spring Festival, I've been commissioned to write a new piece for them as well. So they're actually performing at the Newbury Spring Festival, which is, it's a festival for world-class musicians. So, BBC orchestras visit, Moscow Philharmonic, Welsh National Orchestra. They get the highest quality of musicians there. Some of them, the chamber groups and so on coming through are household names. So the festival opening concert is Jess Gillam and her ensemble. So a name I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. So for Wantage Band to be invited to play at that concert, at that festival is, a big deal for an amateur group again. But as I say, the standard's so high, and then the festival's commissioned me to write a new piece, especially for the occasion. So I'm creating a colossal noise for that.
Fantastic.
Yeah, lots of brass noises.
Yeah, I was going to say that you seem to have been heading in the brass direction here for the last year to a large extent. Is that kind of by choice, or just what sort of attracts at the moment? Is that the kind of thing you're sort of feeling for, as it were?
No, not really. I mean, I'm really enjoying the whole brass band experience, but it's something I've fallen into rather than aimed at. And in fact, most of the music I've written over the last year has been orchestral music or chamber music. So there has been a couple of quite big, significant orchestral performances over the last year, which sadly I can't share with your listeners at the moment because we're still waiting for the recordings to be released. Because they've been, recorded for commercial release. We have to wait for that process to go through. But one of those is London Chamber Orchestra. Fantastic group. Going to go and see them again tomorrow. And the other one was with the very well-known City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra, the world-renowned CBSO. So I've had some great performances of new pieces of mine in the last year. Made some good sounds, some real grimy sounds.
With the London Chamber Orchestra, that was also, I think you were selected as one of their sort of cohorts for working with them for in 2022. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So they ran a program called LCO New, where they selected some composers to work with them. So it was a great opportunity not just to write a piece for the band and say, here's some music, now go off and play it, but actually to have the whole process of working with them and that collaborative development of the piece alongside them. And not everybody has an orchestra at home to try stuff out on to see if it works. I mean, I'm sure there's some people somewhere who have like some sort of 17th century potentates. They've got their own house players.
Princess Esterhazy or somebody like that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's a bit uncommon these days to be in that sort of position of wealth as a composer. So to be able to, on a number of occasions through the year, work with LCO and their conductor and their brilliant CEO, Jocelyn Lightfoot, who's wonderful, supportive person.
So of course we have a composer here who's in a very got lots of money and an orchestra in his own house. Jacob, is that right?
It's true. I have people ready and waiting to play, but it is interesting. I I am in the luxurious position of having an ensemble that I work with 2 times a week, and I get to like try things out with them, and it's a fascinating process to see how my own interpretation of music changes because I get to work with people so closely and so frequently. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are, like in kind of like a residency situation where you do get to work with a string quartet or an orchestra or any group continuously. How does that change your writing? Like, do you find you write things differently, more specifically to certain players because you know them? Like, what's your process?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like, generally that's my approach for writing music anyway, is that I'm writing for players and not for instruments. So I'm not writing for flute two. I'm writing for David, who's playing the second flute part. I'm not writing for a string quartet, but for, a specific ensemble. I think that's kind of part of the way in which I'm employed as a composer as well, though, in that generally most of my work is commission based and ensemble based, and people are coming to me and saying, write for us, write for this group of musicians. So yeah, being able to work with them and see what different musicians can do and what they're interested in, and discussing with them and letting some of their ideas and feedback kind of flavor the stew that I'm cooking up is, yeah, it's a really important part of the process. And I do try to be collaborative. Obviously, I'm a composer, so I'm a complete control freak. I like to, have that mastery over every single dotted quarter note and microtonal interval. I mean, who doesn't? But there's also a time, and we'll talk about this when we come to one of my pieces in a bit, where it's good to really let the collaboration take center stage, I suppose.
It's kind of interesting that you, for me, as a non-musical person, about how you write for a specific person or specific quartet. What when you meet these people, how do you sort of assess, I guess, how you're going to do that? I mean, how does that work in a sort of a specific term? I mean, do you sort of listen and say, okay, that's the feeling I get from this person, or?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've written very much music for people who I haven't already heard playing. So I think sometimes when music performers, instrumentalist singers, ensembles are commissioning new music or looking for music to play, they're approaching people who are already known to them, rather than, just selecting someone at random from a catalogue of composers. So they look interesting. It is much more a case of like, we know this person, we like what they're doing, and we like them, and we want to work with. So it is sort of like from the outset there is that personal connection. So I go and see live as much music as I can. So I think that sort of support is a two-way thing. So if I'm expecting somebody to play some music that I've written, then it'd be a bit kind of, I don't know, it seems a bit rude to expect them to do that without having, already paid an interest in them. Like, I expect them to be interested in like what I have to say musically. So, I'd want to hear what they're doing as well. So I think it's a bit like dating. You have to be in the same place at the same time and be wanting the same thing. And then hopefully some magic funding fairy waves her wand and it happens. Which is, that's the elephant in the room, isn't it?
Yeah. I think we talked about this last time, actually, about how anybody ever actually makes a career of actually writing music is always amazing, really, I think, so these days. Yes,
I don't think, and there's probably about 4 or 5 people in the whole country who are making a living entirely from writing music, if that. And I think even some really kind of well-known household names like Tom Ades, for example, are still doing a lot of teaching, writing, conducting, performing. That's just the way it is. You get a big commission and it's thousands of pounds, and then that is your work for the next few months, and it's consuming. And you think, well, that's a lot of money. And you say, hold on, I've got to actually make this last now. So yeah, I think we're all doing other things as well. I mean, I'm teaching, I'm playing, I'm performing, I'm mentoring, I'm writing and reviewing. We had to do all this other stuff too.
Great. So let's talk about some music. And we're going to start by talking about a little bit about the ARC project and a track called Galactic Hallucination. So this was written, I think, after COVID, or at least relaunched the ARC project after COVID. So maybe you'd like to say a bit about that one.
Yeah, it's a great title, isn't it? It's Galactic Hallucination.
Yeah,
It is.
Love it.
So this was a project by a group called the ARC Project, a project by the project. There we go. And their kind of aim here was to bring together some trios of different instrumentalists with a composer and an artist, a visual artist. So they're particularly looking for people who were, wanted to write something musically in response to these images. And there are these super striking images by, I think he's Yorkshire-based, it's up that way somewhere. Artist called Desmond Clark, who does these amazing pictures with computer-controlled pens. And so he sets up various algorithms or plotting programs, and then lets the pen follow the program that he's set for it, and then it produces these amazing kind of three-dimensional landscapes. And this particular one, Galactic Hallucinations, the movements of the pen produce this sort of geometrical sequence that looks like a sort of disintegrating blueprint for a Norman or early medieval church, but all kind of broken up into its different planes and sections going off in different directions. And sort of like the nature of the way that it's produced is with the pen on the paper. It's not computer printed. It's the computer's actually drawing on the paper. So it's got these inconsistencies in places where the pen hasn't quite caught, or the ink started to run a bit, or it's dried out slightly. So it's got this sort of, I don't know, it's man-made, artificial, everything, super cool texture to it. And I think that's something I wanted to reflect in the music, which you'll hear when you listen to it. It's got these sort of geometric shapes, and they're kind of sound shapes, sound objects, and they repeat and they loop, and they kind of algorithmically unfold and disintegrate into the white space of the page. And then something else kind of grows out of that. And there's a lot of sort of similar sounding things and things that sound like they're repeated, but actually it's very little exact repetition in the piece. Almost always when something's being repeated, it's that with subtle changes. So yeah, that's the piece really. I think sometimes it's quite hard to talk about music, but this piece has got this really strong visual image that goes with it. So if any of your listeners were just to Google Desmond Clark Galactic Hallucinations, they could probably try it right after this show, and you'd probably find this super striking black and white image, and just look at that while you're listening to the sounds. Go, oh yeah, I can hear what Florrie's doing. It kind of makes sense.
Well, that sounds like a great introduction. Let's take a listen.
Yeah, it's funny you say that it is algorithmic in the way you're thinking about it, because it certainly sounds that way. To me, it sounds like iterative and complex without being like unnecessarily dense. It feels very linear in a weird way, and so like algorithmic is kind of an interesting word that you bring out. And I'm wondering what your kind of how you piece that out. Like when you're writing it, how do you iterate on it, and how did you modulate through the different kind of forms of the themes? What was your process?
Yeah, that's a good question, because a lot of composers do have some really kind of strict, almost mathematical, process-based ways of working with sound. And my sort of manipulation of this piece, and I think I do work the material quite hard in this piece and make it do lots of things, but it's almost always intuitively led. So I'm not working with stacks of prime numbers or some kind of quadratic equation or there's nothing you can chart or graph there. It is intuitive, and I think that's something I've really learnt with working with sound, is because it takes place in time and across through this fourth dimension. It's really difficult for a listener to perceive relationships that might be very obvious on the page, or in when you look at the score or count bars or something. Stuff that's visual or mathematical very often can't actually be heard. So I think it's one of the wonderful things about some music, for example, like some of Steve Reich's process pieces. Like the process is really obvious; it's on the surface because it's a very simple process for adding or taking away notes, or moving similar patterns in and out of sync with each other. And I certainly don't want to go, bashing composers who do compose by process, but I just found that like when I rely on the algorithm to generate stuff, it doesn't do what I want. And that's kind of interesting, because then you get sort of interesting results. But they're in the control then of the process and not in the control of me. And I think, as I said before, I am a bit of a control freak.
Fair point. I mean, I think there's something really, those of us who play and write music. I mean, we think it's so obvious that the algorithm or your quadratic equation obviously can be perceived by both player and listener, but it isn't, and it often produces this kind of cold music that doesn't actually do something satisfying to the listener or the player even. And so it's interesting that you kind of come at it, I hate the word organic, but like organically in a process way. And do you also write that way for the instruments, like your maybe composition itself in the notes, but also the way you write for the different players in that trio?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a woodwind player myself, and it is a woodwind trio. So I think, I'm thinking about the actual way in which instruments are physically played as well. So, I mean, it really is just about finger position, lip position, air pressure, mouth shape. And it's just those variables, and it's kind of like, I'm thinking about the sort of physicality of making these sounds. So when you listen to the piece, there are some, I don't want to use the word extended techniques, because, they're just techniques. They're not the techniques you learn when you do your grade 1 ABRSM exam. Because, a lot of the techniques that people are taught in music schools and conservatoires are the techniques of the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. They're historically very staid. But, these are all just different ways of using that column of air and the way making the air inside the instrument vibrate in different ways. Get some cool sounds. It's got to sound good. Otherwise, there's no point.
I mean, that is very true. And I think, winds, I'm also like a woodwind player. Like, there's so much opportunity for color that we don't explore, and there's so much opportunity for like timbral shift that we kind of lose if we don't think about the instrument, think about the player, think about who's playing it, how they're playing it. That's what I really like about your music. That's why it's interesting to me that you write brass band music. Again, incidentally, you've kind of fallen into it, but it's incidentally funny that you write for brass, because similarly, like, brass has so many sounds to explore that I think are left a lot of the time.
Yeah, I mean, the piece I'm creating at the moment for Tredegar Town Band, which is one of Wales's leading ensembles, for the Vela Glamorgan Festival, is basically all around tempo exploration. There's no melodic or rhythmic material at all, really. It's all about sort of washes of timbre and changing instrumental colour.
Yeah,
it's going to be very beautiful when it's done, hopefully.
Yeah, I'm sure it will be. Yeah.
I think what was interesting when I listened to it was this feeling that, the instruments were being played in a non-classical way. I mean, they had this kind of, sometimes I don't know if it's the correct term, breathy feeling, or you could hear the breath, if you know what I mean. It was kind of the person was coming through in it, and I think that kind of made it a lot more interesting, gave it a lot more texture, which is maybe the relationship to the pen on the paper, the texture of the pen or something. I don't know, but that's what it came over to me. There was a lot of texture in each note, which I think took me a while to actually hear, but the more I listened, the more I got it. So it was kind of interesting, I think.
Yeah, I'm nodding here, but your viewers can't see that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, each player's part for this comes with like a couple of sheets of instructions before the music even starts about how to prepare themselves for some of the techniques they have to do, about the audible breathing and alternative fingerings, and some multiphonics for the instruments produce more than one note at once, and sort of rhythmicized vibratos using lips and the diaphragm in different ways. It's just really having some fun with the different ways of producing sounds.
And I think that's kind of interesting, because you mentioned, like people at school, that's not what you're taught to do, any of that. You're taught completely the opposite. And I kind of think that's a bit of a shame. I mean, because there's so much more you could do with the instrument, and it's kind of stayed. I think we said that already, but it's a shame that those things aren't explored, about putting some personality into it a bit more.
Yeah, especially with wind instruments, there is that direct connection with the breath of the performer. I mean, especially on the recorder and the flute, which I suppose links to the next piece really well. That was accidental, which is this piece called Take Back 2. So it's a sequel.
Yeah, well, tell us more. This is the Gastella Quartet with Carla Reese as the flautist, if I remember.
Yeah. So first of all, the original Take Back was about a 5-minute long piece for big recorder, for bass recorder or contrabass recorder. So these are enormous big wooden boxes, basically. And the recorder's probably got this most direct connection with the breath of all the wind instruments, because it just goes straight into the mouth. There's no reeds in the way. There's no blowing sideways. And basically the air that comes through the player's mouth is the air that goes through the instrument. So there's a whole load of breathy effects, vocal effects, tongue effects, vocalizations through the instrument. And it's quite groovy in that way. And this is a piece of mine, actually, the original Take Back, which has recently had like a whole load of interest in it and a load of performances in Amsterdam and other places in Holland, where the recorders are really big, and also in the UK and America, because it's been championed by Sarah Jeffrey of Team Recorder, who's possibly the internet's best known recorder player, which is a title to wear with pride. So it was originally written for another recorder virtuoso, Emily Bannister. And then this piece, Take Back 2, basically has at its core the original Take Back piece, reimagined as a flute and string quartet piece. And they don't really play as separate instruments. We don't really hear the music as 5 instruments. It's kind of like this meta instrument made of 16 bowed and plucked strings and a blown pipe, and it's played by 5 people all at once. So, always when the instruments are played, or almost always, they're being put together to make these combination sounds. And it's almost like I've taken all the notes in the original Take Back and all the original gestures and amplified everything. And my process was like, have you ever done this thing where you basically doodle on a piece of paper and you draw some lines, and then you go and fill it in, you do some cross hatching and some shading and do some loops and circles within the loops, and then they have different patterns of loops and shading themselves, and it's just like that obsessively adding extra detail into what was originally quite skeletal, but just like a solo player pushing air through one tube. So yeah, when you hear the two pieces side by side, it's probably not immediately apparent that they've got this common ancestry. I think, maybe when you look at the dots and kind of work out where stuff comes from, you say, oh yeah, let's say that phrase, like buried in it is this, the skeleton, it's bones of this piece, in this other one. But Take Back 2 is about twice as long as the original. There's a lot more going on just from moment to moment and going on through the whole piece. And yeah, I mean, it's a piece I could talk about for ages. I mean, it's got this process where ideas keep being developed as they're being exposed to our ears. So it's not like some sort of Beethoven piano sonata where it's like, here is an idea, and then I'm going to play it again, and then I'm going to develop it, and then I'm going to return to the original idea. It's more the case that as I'm showing the idea to the audience's ears, it's being developed right in front of them. It's kind of like, it's just self-developing processes, and everything kind of, links into each other. It is sectional, but all the sectionals blur together, until eventually everything kind of just coalesces into this super groovy unison bit about, it's probably about 4/5 of the way through. So it's like all the instruments really groove hard together before it sort of dissolves away again at the end. It's a fun piece.
It kind of struck me that it was, I mean, almost a little bit chaotic at the beginning. I mean, although there's a bit of chaos in each when they're playing together, and it is like they're trying to sort of. I got the feeling they were trying to work out what the other one was doing. I know it sounds a bit weird, but it was almost like they're all like, "Okay, where are we going with this? Where are we heading?" And then, as you say, at the end, it's sort of, "Oh, look, we've found where we want to be," sort of thing. And then it's like, "Okay, that's it," sort of thing. It's maybe that's not quite what you had in mind.
No,
but,
that is kind of what you get with this continual development. Though you do feel that the music is always looking for the next step, and it's always shifting and changing. And though, because you don't hear any repetition, and you don't, all the material is similar rather than the same. It's I don't think, again, this is another piece where I don't think there's any exact repetition. Every time something's coming back, it's been moved around in some way. And, the beat is so broken in the piece as well. It's so scatty. I mean, it'd be a great challenge to sit somebody down and watch it and say, okay, I want you to predict when the beat's going to fall in the next bar.
There's a challenge for the listeners.
Well, as soon as it establishes a pattern, it then develops that pattern and moves on to something new. Yeah, have a listen to Take Back Two.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that now, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it.
What is your philosophy on rhythm and pulse? And it's every composer approaches things really differently. But are you groove based when you're writing? Are you thinking in groove? Are you thinking in collective kind of klangfarben? Like, what are you thinking?
Okay, so a lot of my music, it does groove quite hard, I feel. I mean, there's a lot of very rhythmical stuff, like particularly like that last piece. Um, and I think the really most important rhythmical element in my music is about rhythmic emphasis. So it's not just about rhythms, but it's about the strong and weak forces there. So, a lot of times when composers and students and so on are learning about rhythm or talking about rhythm or writing rhythm, they're just thinking about lengths of notes. They're talking about durations, and they're talking about duration patterns and how music's metered and so on. And I think that the heart of rhythm is really about, and especially rhythmic groove, is about emphasis. So you set up a pulse and then lay some sounds across that pulse, and some of them are laid quite hard across that pulse, and some are more gentle, and some are long, sort of laid out sounds, and some are shorter and more precise. And sometimes you have a sound that kind of leads into an impulse, like it's like an uptick, like something that's pushed music forwards. And sometimes you have something that's like right on the pulse, and then you've got things which sit off that syncopation. And I think it's the control of those elements against the pulse, which itself is moving around and creating patterns, is like where the music really dances. And I think there's a bit of an obsession with kind of dancing in a lot of my music. I mean, if anyone's listening and they're a choreographer, or they run a dance school, or they are a dancer, they want to collaborate, then please do reach out, because that's like something I really want to do, is work with dancers, because a lot of my music is so, it's movement based. I want to get people moving around on the stage when it's playing. I mean, it's not dum 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 equal length rhythmic pulsations. It's more like dun 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 ba 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 da 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 dum bum ba da 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 dum dum, and it's like, I don't know, just when you're writing it and you're putting the notes in the right place with emphasis, because it feels right. Certainly when I was writing this piece, people who had kind of watched me compose it thought I was an absolute crackpot, because I was making all these mouth noises, like for the recorder, and flute articulations, clicking my fingers and tapping the table, going taka 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 taka.
Do you feel? I mean, when you're putting these beats down, is that something I just wonder if you feel that. You said you were interested in the dance. Do you actually feel them in your body? Is that kind of how you feel it's right, or is it more a head thing? If you know what I mean, do you sort of? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I do know what you mean, and I think the answer is yes. It feels right in the head, and it feels right in the body as well. And I think I do listen to a lot of dance music and electronic music and music from other cultures, which is not grounded in let's take a big unit of time and divide it up into equal sized small units of time, which is what so much of Western music is. And it's certainly when you go into the popular music world, there is so much groove based stuff where it's like, let's take everything and divide it into units of 4 and then subdivide those into units of 4. I mean, okay, that's great. I mean, for what it does, it's absolutely fine. It's a really good starting point, but there's a lot of other fun things we can do with groove and where emphasis lies and so on.
Great. Let's move on to another piece, and this one is from an EP which came out in September of 2022.
I
already have to apologize. People don't know this, but I mentioned this to Flora. I said I think it was a fantastic EP, and she said you missed it in 2022. So yeah, hands up, I missed it. Sorry, Florrie. But it was called, the EP was called Harbingers of Change.
Yeah.
And the piece we're going to do is 4 of Swords. Now, this is all kind of tarot-related titles.
It is. It's all super mystical. I mean, the expression that somebody used at the recording session was that the room was full of queer mystical energy, which is like such a good term. So this is quite collective compositions. So it's very much for that sort of jazz approach. But I was writing like the head material and the outlines of each chart, and then giving the players loads of freedom to work around and with the notated material. So you'll see there's some videos from the session as well, and we all have music stands in front of us, and we're all playing off the music, but there's also a lot of freedom to interact with improvisation, and there's some overdubs and layering and editing. There's all sorts going on. There's some great studio work as well.
So how did it come about, this EP and this Harbingers of Change? So how did you arrive at that?
I got a grant from Drake Music, which is a national sort of charity for disabled musicians, and it really wanted something kind of on the theme of change and transformation. So this is a set of pieces which I took a collective into the studio to produce, and each piece is based around the idea of a different tarot card, and they are the tarot cards which deal with ideas of change or transformation. So I think this particular piece, this was the Four of Swords, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I can't remember which track we decided to listen to. So yeah,
Yeah,
Four of
of
Swords.
course.
Yeah, this is a card which is all about sort of the preparation for change, and that need to lie fallow before new growth, and to take stock of the situation. It's got that resting energy. It's not a card of idleness. It's definitely a card of resting after a transformation or change, or preparing for something to happen. It's not a sit and do nothing. It's got that sort of interval energy about it. It's that break in between the exciting things where you gather the strength and reflect on the past. So that's kind of like the whole vibe of this piece. Musically, it's based around a really simple, drawn-out melodic idea. It's this lovely modal saxophone solo from the beautiful Lara Jones, which then develops into a duet. And I've actually mirrored the parts here, so that like when one instrument goes up, the other one goes down, basically. So then that's mirrored by Amy Bryce, and they are playing alto flute on this recording. So whenever Amy is going down, Lara's going up, and then so they've got this mirrored thing, and this is all notated, and from there the music develops into this sort of ritual incantation of meditation. It's all very, very sort of trippy and spaced out, and then the music just finally sort of dissolves into this peaceful nothingness. It's a great pleasure working with this enormously talented quartet of musicians. I've mentioned Lara, and I mentioned Amy, but also as Maya Lee Rossenwasser on piano, and they're a great improvising pianist, but not from a jazz background, just sort of improvising contemporary classical musician, a very good reader as well. Fab person to work with in the studio. And then there's me I'm on drums on this recording. This is my sort of my other career is as a percussionist, a drummer. So particularly in sort of like jazz contexts, and as well as classical sort of orchestral brass bands, percussion. I'm not really like a rock drummer, but I'm quite at home on the drum kit here. So yeah, that's the piece. It's meditative. It's this big space preparing for transformation, and that just seemed very, very relevant to this super queer bunch of musicians.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, let's take a listen to it. I must say, we're going to just hear the one piece from the EP, but I would recommend listeners to listen to all the pieces, because I think they work together really well. I think that's one of the things about the sort of story you're telling. But we'll hear one of the pieces, but go look it up.
Maybe as kind of a wrapping up final question, just because I know we're coming to the end of our time. I'm wondering what your thoughts on like improvisation is as a self affirmed control based composer. What do you think about the process of like co creation and improvisation and working collectively?
Yeah, I mean, I love improvisation. I love improvising myself. I love working with other improvisers. I love listening to other people improvise. And I think almost all of my music does include some improvisation at some point, whether that's in the sort of development of the music or, often like in the actual performance as well. And of course, the thing with improvising is you get a very different result, kind of depending on the player you're working with. So when you are working, like I was saying before, like particular musicians in mind, then you can get like a particular result from. You can talk to them and say like, that thing that you do, I want that some of that stuff, or you know what, I just trust you to do your thing here. And I think there is something about trusting the musicians to actually do what you want them to do if you give them like some good pointers. I think if you just say like do whatever you want, that's really hard. Just kind of do some music, just play some music, but like with something as a starting point, some guidelines and a shape. And I think a lot of improvising musicians really enjoy having that kind of guidance and collaboration. Yeah, I mean, it does sit very weirdly with my detail obsessed control freakery. And I think that sort of juxtaposition of two things is like interesting in itself. I mean, I've written pieces which have like almost completely free improvisation, like happening at the same time as some very, very precisely notated, very technically dense stuff. And, you know, it's just a vibe sometimes, isn't it?
Well, it clearly works. I mean,
Yeah.
your juxtaposition of ideologies clearly produces some really wonderful things.
Yeah, well, juxtaposition in itself is super interesting. I think everything changes in meaning through its context, and like the more you can do with that context, like the sort of message you can put into that juxtaposition.
Do you think it also challenges you to some extent having this juxtaposition? I mean, you know, your control freak plus having to let that go in some way. Do you think that actually is kind of like I don't know, kind of like a stimulation to you?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure challenge is the right word. I don't need to look for any more challenges in my life. I think, you know, just being alive in England and Britain in 2023 brings everyone in the country enough challenges, whatever their, you know, background or situation. There is a stimulation, I suppose, in looking for the difficult stuff and stretching and reaching for the next thing and never being content with where I am. I mean, that's probably like one of the reasons I've been, well, without being too modest, quite successful over the last couple of years. Is because I'm always reaching out for that next thing and trying to do one better. You know,
but I think that's a challenge, isn't it? I mean, I think that is what people who are good at their art or science or anything do. They're always challenging themselves to go one step beyond what is comfortable.
Yeah. Well, I've never want to be comfortable. Comfortable sounds boring, doesn't it?
Comfortable is boring as hell. Yes, I know. Yeah. It's kind of not where we are, I think. It's kind of good. No. So what's 20? We've talked about what you did in 2022 and a little bit of 2023. So what's the challenges coming for the rest of the year?
Rest of the year. So we've got collaborations coming up with 3 different brass bands, including with Newbury Spring Festival. Have this premiere coming up soon at Wigmore Hall with the Kynan Quartet through the RPS scheme. Performances at Vale of Glamorgan Festival. And then just a whole load of writing. I'm doing a load of writing at the moment. I'm working on a PhD. I'm doing some reviewing, doing some articles. So a lot of thinking about music and writing about music and reading about music. And possibly one thing I think is maybe another opera. Ooh. But you know, that's a chat for another time before we get into really big long topic. Good. Yeah. The last one was such a hit, so I've got some ideas for a very sci-fi kind of opera, and there's some people that want to, some people that want to perform it, and some people that want to produce it and direct it. I just need to find someone that wants to pay for it because opera's about as expensive as it gets.
Too true.
I know. Yeah. That sounds great. Well, Florrie, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show again, and thank you for bringing us up to speed with the myriad of things you've been doing over the past year or so.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel like I'm becoming a regular guest.
We hope so.
Well, yeah. I mean, as long as you keep writing good music, we'll keep having you back.
Well, thank you very much. I'll try to keep it good. I may just keep writing music, and then the good or not can be like up to other people to decide. I'll find it's good. Thanks you so much for having me on the show.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
So that's all for this episode. You've been listening to the Classical Queer Podcast, and Jake and I look forward to being with you next month. The incidental music is courtesy of Jared Miller, and the show was produced by Samantha Jane.